Hello and welcome to Heroic Media. I'm Patrick Cordova.
And I'm Michelle Bauman. For this episode, we have a special guest with us, Vicki Thorn, the founder of Project Rachel and the executive director of the National Office for Post-Abortion Reconciliation and Healing. Vicki, thank you so much for being here.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Great. So I guess we should start off just what is Project Rachel?
That's a
what
good place for us to start.
Okay.
Project Rachel is the official outreach of the Catholic Church in the U.S. for women, to women who have had abortions. It is a ministry, it is a holistic ministry that is in a diocese with the blessings of the bishop, with a network of caregivers specially trained, confessors, mental health professionals, spiritual directors, medical professionals, and others who are there to journey one-on-one with women and men who've lost children to abortion. It came about, just by way of history, in 1975, the bishops of the United States issued a pastoral plan for pro-life activities. It was the first response to Roe v. Wade. And in that, they called for a multifaceted approach as church. First, teaching on the sanctity of all life, womb to tomb. Secondly, getting people involved in the legislative process. Thirdly, caring for women in crisis pregnancies. And fourthly, providing a ministry of healing for those who had had abortions. Now, that was pretty cutting edge because nobody was doing it in this country. I mean, it was unheard of. But the bishops are confessors. They'd heard the pain, but they didn't know what to do with it. But they knew it was important, okay? Sure. I became Respect Life Director in Milwaukee in 1977. I'd had a friend in high school who'd had an abortion years before that left footprints in my heart. She'd placed a child for adoption and then had an abortion, both in high school.
Wow.
And always said, I can live with the adoption. I can't live with the abortion. And her mother had arranged it. It was before it was legal. And when I saw this call, I thought, as church, we have all that we need to do this. Recognizing that the pain of abortion many times there are layers here. It isn't only just the loss of the child, it's what went before. And it's my belief that many of these women were spiritually aborted themselves. And when it comes to could I nurture a life, I don't feel I have the wherewithal to do that. It took me 7 years to find enough people, but when it came together in 6 weeks. We had our Archbishop there, we had 60 of our priests, all of our Catholic Charities people, first of its kind in the world that I'm aware of. And I had invited the press, and the next day the press took it around the world.
Great.
On the Feast of Our Lady of La Salette, the Consolation of Sinners, Weeping Madonna. It was unplanned, all right, but it was like pretty amazing. But this is really a key piece in terms of church outreach.
Absolutely. Now you talk about reaching out to women and men and healing some of the wounds. What are the wounds for women and for men? I think sometimes people don't realize that those exist.
Yeah, we don't even think about them. You know, for women, this is the loss of a child. In spite of, the societal wisdom that this is a non-event right. And it's fine and you're set free. The first thing biologically is that she carries cells from every child she's ever conceived the rest of her life. There are more cells there with an abortion or a miscarriage. It's impossible to biologically forget. So put on hold the moral question, all right? As humans, we need to resolve the loss of our children. But there's this sense of grief, of being really having offended God if she has a faith history. Suicidality, the woman right afterwards, if she's a teenager, is 10 times more likely to attempt a suicide in that first 6 months.
Wow.
I mean, this is incredible. And the slightly older women, it's about 6 times. Well, that's amazing. You think about numbers. Chemical dependency, suicide attempts, health issues. It's just this long, long list. And we never know when it's going to come to the forefront. Because after the abortion period, when my baby would have been born, I'm oftentimes in sort of a crisis during that time. I take a deep breath and go, oh, well, I feel better now. And then when I'm expecting my first child, it might come up. I'm suddenly infertile, it might come up. It might not come up until I realize I never had children and my friends are having grandchildren at any point. Or it may come up in hospice care for someone who's dying, for an old woman. You never know.
Right.
Everybody's different and we can't say, oh, at precisely this moment it will happen. And again, the awareness that many times there's baggage that comes with it. So the point of Project Rachel is that it's holistic. You need to talk to a counselor because now something else has come up, or there's ongoing issues. Hey, we're here. A marriage that fell apart perhaps, abuse that happened prior. we're there to walk with her the full 9 yards, okay? Now men, we don't realize that men are biologically impacted by pregnancy. So 4 weeks after she's pregnant, men experience this pheromone cue, which is a scent cue that she's pregnant. And he undergoes hormonal changes throughout the pregnancy, including at the end when his testosterone drops, his estrogen goes up, he gets cortisol as a bonding hormone, not stress, bonding here, vasopressin, which is a unique male bonding hormone, and he gets prolactin, the nursing hormone. And it lasts for about 6 weeks. But what's interesting is that with each subsequent child, he gets more prolactin. Nature's saying more responsibilities will help you.
So what does that do?
Well, it means he's physiologically in this dance.
Gotcha.
And each one of those things helps him to move from being sort of the bachelor, the free bachelor, to being the protector provider. I mean, this is truly an awesome dance as God built it here, because both parties are changed. So when we say to men, you're nothing but a sperm donor, because that's what the society says, we're wrong. And fathers suffer a great deal. There are forcers. Everybody would like us to believe all men are forcers. They're not. There are men who would have laid their life down in front of a car for that baby. They would have done anything to stop that abortion. Sometimes they find out later, sometimes they wonder if. There's a number of scenarios. But it can impact his fathering because he becomes an overly protective father, very worried during pregnancies when he's with his partner, you know. Drugs, alcohol, hiding in sexual addiction and pornography. I'm never going to touch a woman again. Great fear of relationships. Sometimes they just don't want to get into another relationship. And so both men and women are really significantly impacted, and both need spiritual care. Definitely. We've done 2 conferences over the years with the Knights of Columbus called Reclaiming Fatherhood on men and abortion. Unheard of, okay? But we need to talk about it because it is one of those losses that impacts everybody in the system.
So how do people find out about you? About your organization, generally speaking?
Well, generally speaking, dioceses will advertise things. The bishops oversee Project Rachel at this point, and they have brochures, and in the past they've done radio spots. Depends on what resources a diocese has. But you know, it might be in the diocesan paper, in the bulletins, announcements. You know, maybe there's a pro-life event going on, people are handing things out. In some places, the Theology on Tap young adults carry little business cards in their wallets, and they leave them in bathrooms and other places, just one, you know. You never know who God needed to know that it was there. So that's how it works.
And the organization has spread significantly since it started a couple decades ago.
Oh yeah, 3 decades. We just celebrated our 30th anniversary.
Nice. Congratulations.
It's in the majority of dioceses in this country, and over the years I've been in 25 countries and planted seeds. So they're not necessarily all blossoming yet, because in many countries they don't have the same resources we do to mental health people or whatever. I was just speaking recently with someone, a sister in Rome, about the possibility of speaking to sister superiors about taking this as an apostolate. Because in many countries, like when we were in mainland China, it's the sisters who are dealing with the women. It's true in Africa, it's true in Latin America.
Got to work with who you have.
You got to work with who you have. And they'd be perfectly capable of doing this. We just need to give them the training they need to do it.
Absolutely. That's wonderful. Let's take a quick break. When we come back, we'll talk about the effects of the sexual revolution.
Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to Heroic Media. In case you're just joining us, I'm Patrick Cordova.
And I'm Michelle Bauman. We're here with Vicki Thorn, the founder of Project Rachel and the executive director of the National Office of Post-Abortion Reconciliation and Healing.
Thank you for having me again.
Absolutely.
It's a pleasure.
Vicki, we're talking about the effects of the sexual revolution. You've done a significant amount of research on this topic. How did you get interested in it?
Well, I sort of came into it backwards, but working with men and women whose lives have been touched by abortion raised a lot of questions for me about, well, what happened? I mean, why? Abortion's always been here. This is not new. The Hippocratic Oath forbade it, so they had a problem, all right? But it suddenly, you know, moved into center stage. And this particular part really came about because my husband, Dr. Bill Thorn, had done a talk at a seminary, and he'd used the material of 2 men by the name of Howe and Strauss who look at generational shifts. And he came home, we were talking about this, and I said, those are the people I'm dealing with. So that's what kind of set off my own curiosity about what was different here, because there were many things that changed at this point.
Interesting. So what as a society did change, do you think, since the sexual revolution?
Everything.
Yeah,
well,
exactly.
actually really starting with the sexual revolution, not necessarily since, but with.
Okay.
It's really a marker point. Okay, the advent of the pill changed our view about relationships, about marriage, about children, and it set off this sort of concept that sex is a recreational activity without consequence. And, you know, the pill is good medicine for women, and, well, if you do get pregnant, don't worry, then we needed abortion, which came online.
Right.
And then, well, it's so safe, but, well, if you're left infertile, don't worry, we now have reproductive technology.
Right.
I mean, this is sort of a slippery,
everything.
there's an answer for everything. But at that same time, there were a lot of other things changing. And so, you know, this was a time with the advent of the pill where our mindset about children changed. Children went from being welcomed to being wanted. I was sort of guaranteed my two. And my boy and my girl. And then if I have a child with a disability, well, perfection was warranted here, right? So I have an opportunity here to discard that child. And I say that in a way because that's really what it's about. We aren't thinking about the moral outcomes here, okay?
Right.
That this is a unique gift, different, but unique. You know, children, and you'll hear parents describe their children this way. This is Sam, this is Mary, and that's John. He's our oops. Now, for that child, that's an existential wound because he knows he's a mistake from the get-go.
Right.
And either he's going to be off the rails, because it doesn't matter, or he's going to be perfect. So should something happen, and say it's a girl and she gets pregnant, there's no way she could tell her parents because there'd be this disappointment and it would prove that she, whatever. You know, to help people who are those oopses in their family to understand that God just didn't respect their parents' plan. And I do a lot of talking to young adults, and you see them sort of, I mean, I watch them. I see this like, oh, changes the whole story. And so that question, you know, what's the outcome in terms of things like partner choice? We don't realize that the pill causes us to choose the wrong partner just biologically. We have a preference then by pheromones, these are scent hormones of affiliation, for a male whose immune system is more like my father's or my own or my brother's. That's a fertility challenge. God gave us women the gift, if I'm not contracepting, to be attracted. First cut, got to make sure he's worth it, but first cut,
You're right.
it's someone with whom fertility is possible and the likelihood of stronger, healthier children. Okay, an amazing thing when you think about it.
Right.
All right, but nobody knows that. Look, the divorce rate exploded. You look at this and you just see it's running parallel. And gosh, there are even scientists writing about a possible connection because if I go off the pill, I no longer find him attractive.
Right.
It's not that he's not a good man. It's not that I don't love him. Biologically, says this isn't right. Okay, this is wrong. Something's broken here. You know, then we needed abortion. So we have multitudes, millions, 50 million plus in this country, 50 million a year in the world, of women who've had abortions. And we have the men and the women and the brothers and the sisters and the friends and the grandparents and the aunts and the uncles. My belief, there's no one in this country who hasn't been touched by an abortion. We might not know it. But 1 in 3 women, according to statistics, has an abortion, Catholic or not. All right? Phenomenal number. What does that mean in terms of broken parenting? Because, you know, women who have abortions have a hard time bonding to that next baby sometimes. Same is true for men. You know, alcohol issues, suicidality, depression, sexual addiction. We don't tend to think about that. Men say, I'm never going to touch a woman again. So the people who work with men recognize these things. We don't, all right? It's that hidden... There's this hidden sort of epidemic out there. You know, other things that happened. This is a time when mobility became much greater. We used to live in one place and grow up there. Okay, now I don't have the support of my family or friends. Even if my family was crazy, there was somebody who knew and cared about me. Divorce, okay, what's the fallout from that? Enormous, enormous things. What about full-time daycare? Full-time daycare for children, this is politically incorrect, but from 0 to 3, they can only handle about 20 hours a week in outside the home, commercial daycare, where I'm in a part of a group. If I'm in Grandma's house, it's a different ballgame. Grandma loves me. As a kid, I can love lots of people. We used to be cared for by people who knew us. But that impact of what does it mean to be peer-driven, because in daycare I become peer-driven. I have to conform. Then we have the whole issue of media changing at that point, more and more television. Then we moved into computers. At the drop of a hat, you're in pornography or whatever, social media, in my face, everywhere, you know. The media is a powerful teacher. It's not teaching us good things, all right? And then we moved into the whole reproductive technology business.
Right.
Who's my father if I am a sperm donor child? Who's my mother if I am conceived with a surrogate? I mean, who am I? Again, an existential question. But the multitudes of things that go with that, and really the sexual revolution was the marker point for that this all started kind of in the 60s. There's little that was going on before, but a lot of this stuff just radically rolled over at that point.
Yeah.
Interesting. So given all of these changes, do you think it's fair to say that the sexual revolution has not succeeded in its goals? I mean, are women empowered? Are people happy? Are people free?
Are they? Not any I've seen. Well, women aren't. I mean, there's the myth of empowerment, and yet the reality is that there's a lot of great grief and sadness there. Okay, and what is the real empowerment? That question mark. We're not really free to be who we were created by God to be as life givers. And I'm not saying back to the days of barefoot and pregnant. There are ways to moderate this. Okay, are people happy? Do we see marriages lasting? No, we don't. Do we see our young people feeling empowered? I don't see that we do. You know, what about our churches? Our churches are emptying in some places. That's why we need the new evangelization. But part of the new evangelization, I believe, is to address the societal issues and allow people to heal, because this takes real deep healing.
Yeah.
When I do young adult things, I don't have to tell you, I don't think you'd be amazed to hear the stuff I hear in terms of how do I make my way through this? I don't know. You know, my family's crumbled. I don't know my grandparents anymore. They're gone. I love my grandma so much, and I never see her. You know, my mom remarried, and there was a sibling there, you know, step sibling, who I came to love, and now they're getting a divorce, and I'm forbidden to see my sister.
Yeah.
I mean, the pain of that, you know, the sexual pain, all of those things that are there.
Absolutely.
I don't think it set us free.
Right, I don't think so either. And I think it's really kind of made society and individuals much more selfish. Like this whole thing, everybody, it's all about what you want. You know, I want a kid, I want a girl at this age, at this time, with this, you know, and it's really, and it spreads, and it does. I think just like you illustrated, is that it branches out into so many different facets of our lives. And the family is really where I think we get attacked the worst and it hurts the most, because family is so foundational to our society today.
And I think we need to build surrogate families in our faith communities and other places where we, you know, need that opportunity to be with people who share values and risk talking about things.
Yes.
You know, it's a different model of church. We're blessed. My husband and I belong to a parish that is like that, and it's been such a gift to all of us.
Yeah,
sure.
Absolutely.
Wonderful. We'll take one more break, and when we come back, we'll go a little bit deeper with Vicki Thorn.
Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to Heroic Media. So for this final segment, we just want to kind of talk about how things have kind of branched out in some newer areas, right? And as you mentioned earlier, it seems like there's an answer for everything, right? First the pill, then abortion, then, you know, and we'll get on to some newer things. Like, for instance, why don't we start with IVF, in vitro fertilization? So how has this kind of progressed and kind of evolved into that, and how does that affect our spiritual life and families and everything else?
You know, I think that one of the things that the society at large has sort of proposed, not verbally, but there, that if we can play God, we should. That we as humans should tinker in terms of all sorts of things, which, you know, looking at the questions of contraceptives, all right? Okay, why do we need IVF? Well, because some people have been left infertile because of this nice treatment. You know, if I'm on the pill a long time, my ovum age. I might have trouble conceiving, all right? I mean, there's just a layer upon layer here. And so, you know, the human being is intensely curious. And so this question of IVF actually goes back a long way. I'm not going to touch on how far back. I was just reading something recently and went, good grief, that goes back a lot further than I thought. But the problem with IVF, the human being is designed by God to be created in love in a human body. It's the ovum. Well, let me just back up 1 minute. First off, sperm, egg getter sperm, there are 3 types, are incapable of fertilizing an ovum unless it's changed in the body of the wife. It undergoes something called capacitation. Now it's capable of what's called an acrosome reaction, which means it can enter the egg, all right, and it swims with more intent. Well, nobody knows that, all right. You know, guys assume that sperm's fertile wherever it is. It's not true, all right. And it's the ovum, according to research, that picks the sperm out of all those sperm that get there, the millions. There's some kind of communication going on, and the ovum goes, that one, and then this becomes possible, okay? And there's all this chemistry happening in the human body. You know, if this is love, if this is, you know, stressful, things that impact our hormones, all right? Once the sperm enters the egg seals itself off. But this is a naturally occurring event, okay, in terms of being capacitated. In IVF, there's an ovum, there's a petri dish, there's sperm that hasn't been capacitated. There's a nice doctor who's going to pick the sperm and inject the sperm. It's not the sperm entering the egg, inject it into the sperm. We know that there are disabilities following with IVF now, and we not as, you know, do we know much? No, because we're about this far in. What are we going to see with this? I think serious questions. I think even spiritually, that at some point my body didn't come into being the way that everybody else's did. What does that mean? You know, people go, oh, well, that's just crazy stuff. Well, there's researchers looking at some of that stuff, okay? Years ago, there was a researcher who had looked at kids who had been IVF conceived, or whatever we call that, and who had been kept on ice, okay, because we freeze them then, and there was the whole baby snowflake outreach. You could adopt somebody else's, you know, fetus, whatever, embryo, whatever we called them at that point, baby. And they found that these kids, when they were little, were fascinated with two things. They did artwork, and like they cut out pictures of palm trees and hot things, you know, hot weather, or glaciers and ice and snow. What's that about? Well, it's because my body wasn't designed, I think, to be kept on ice for a period of and years sometimes. All right? So that's a piece. Surrogacy, what about that? Well, now I'm going to carry a baby for someone who maybe not even related to me, all right? So I have an ovum from someone who's not me. Sperm from a male I've never had sex with. Why is that critical? It takes my woman's body 6 months to make an immune adaptation. I can get pregnant the first time I have sex, but my body makes this change, and we conceive children, and my body goes, oh yeah, that's the kids, okay? So I've never had sex with this partner. It is a being foreign to me that's being implanted into my body. There's chemistry that has to happen to make this pregnancy take, all right? I, as a mother, am going to, or as the carrier, whatever we call this, the surrogate, I am going to carry cells from that child the rest of my life. That child's going to carry cells from me and my mother, potentially, the rest of its life. If it's a female, we've now passed it one more generation. There's immune issues here that we haven't looked at. And there's really bioethical issues. Because, say I'm a commercial surrogate, and there are many of those out there now. You know, I've had 2 kids, I carry 3, I have another one. Those following children are also going to carry cells of a child they're not related to. What does this mean? Again, this is an immune system issue, but it's also a spiritual issue. Who am I? Who am I related to? Everybody in the world carries the mitochondria of their mothers, and their mothers' mothers' mothers, back to 7 lines of women, with the scientific implication of an Eve. You men not only carry your mother's mitochondria, but you carry your father's Y, also cross generations. This issue of who am I, you know, around Advent we have the reading about who begat, who begat, who begat, and everybody sleeps. But part of it is women line, and part of it's male. How do we know that? Why does that matter? Because God made us that way. And I think we have to be very cautious about what appears to be good that may not be the intention of God in how we were meant to be. And you know, this question of infertility, I'll share briefly. We had friends, 2 sets, who were infertile, you know, everything, and this is years ago. No, in no way, no how you're ever going to have a baby. They both adopted a couple of children, and guess what? They got pregnant.
They had some neighbors, the same exact thing.
You know, so was it that God's intention was that they were to be parents to these other children? Because I believe it was. You know, God's bigger than we are, and things work out in ways we don't anticipate. But there's also fallout from behavior, whether it's using chemical contraceptives, or we now got ourselves some STDs as a result of that changing our body. I mean, there's many things here, but I think we have to rethink how God intended this to work,
right.
and to really pay attention, because that's where the gift of nature is.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. And Vicki, can you just comment briefly on what happens when you have forced sterilization, whether it's, you know, explicitly in China or maybe more subtly just people being pressured into being sterilized, maybe here in the States?
Well, you know, that question of losing my fertility is a serious spiritual and psychological wound. Mm-hmm. And the questions that go with it. There are people who have done research on what happens after a hysterectomy. Mm-hmm. Just biologically, again, there is a syndrome. And for men, you know, because we also have sterilizations there, also being forced, the autoimmune issues and other things. But when we give up our gift, you know, the wounds are there. Absolutely. And they're serious.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. A lot of implications.
Yeah, a lot of implications.
All right, Vicki, thank you so much for joining
pleasure.
us. We
Thank
really
you.
appreciate your insight and the great work that you do with
Thank you.
Project Rachel. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right, that's it for this week on Heroic Media. Please join us next week for all the up-to-date news on the pro-life issues that matter to you.
Please feel free to write to us with any comments, questions, or news tips at news@heroicmedia.org.
And please visit our website where you can check out more stories like the ones we discussed tonight. And that website is heroicmedianews.org.
That's it for this time. Until next week, keep us in your prayers.
God bless.